We refuse to vote for Palestine. Well, let me fix that. We refuse to vote for genocide in Palestine. We refuse. We refuse to be talked into selling our souls, into compromising, into being talked, into affirming, endorsing, and enabling genocide. And when we are asked to please, won't we be quiet? Won't we just shut up and sit down? Won't we just be good little boys and girls? Because truly the Democratic Party owns our votes. They own Muslim votes, they own Black votes, they own youth votes, they own so-called liberal votes. But they don't. They have to earn our votes. Any politician who tells you that they own your vote does not deserve consideration of your vote. The Democrats are running scared, and they should be scared. They could fix this if they wanted. They could win back the Muslim vote. But they would rather lose the election. They would rather lose the election than stop the genocide. This is on them. They want to blame Muslims. They want to blame Greens. They want to blame socialists. They want to blame anybody, but just take the focus off of their genocide. Democrats have been losing votes profoundly. When was the big tipping point? It was actually in 2010 in the midterm elections, when they lost 1,000 seats in state legislatures across the country. They lost 64 seats in Congress. They lost 13 seats in the Senate. They lost 13 governorships.
And they're losing in the Senate right now. Right now, the Republican Party is ahead of the Democratic Party in the Senate. It's 50 to 46, 50 to 44. If the Democratic Party wins those 6 undecided seats in the Senate, it'll be tied 50-50.
Where was the third party to blame that on? There was none. This was the after effect, basically, of the Democrats throwing working people under the bus in the bailouts for Wall Street and the big banks and the mortgage brokers in 2008. They bailed out Wall Street and they threw out the homeowners. Instead of bailing out students and families who badly need a bailout, needed it then and need it now, very much against expressed public opinion. The 2 Democratic houses of Congress and the Obama Democratic White House, a trifecta of Democrats, decided to bail out Wall Street to the tune of trillions of dollars and allow millions of homeowners basically to be thrown out and lose their life savings. So the Democrats were punished. They didn't have any third party to blame it on. There was no spoiler mythology in 2010. They just said they got shellacked and they didn't explain why. And since then, that loss has continued as the Democrats continue to lose votes because they have abandoned working people. And even going back before the Wall Street bailouts, you had Bill Clinton and NAFTA and the loss of millions and millions of workers' jobs. So the Democrats have been throwing working people under the bus for decades, actually. They have no one to blame but themselves.
And that part right there, I think, is incredibly true. They want to point fingers at everybody else. They want to point fingers at Jill Stein, Cornel West, Claudia de Cruz. They want to point fingers at you. They want to point fingers at me, everybody else but theirself. Because they completely abandoned the working class. Look at it. Reminder, the Teamsters decided not to endorse the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party was really took it some kind of way. Like, how dare you not do? Nobody owes you anything.
This is why they cannot discuss the issues because they are not standing up for their traditional base. As Joe Biden said in the 2020 race, he said that nothing will change. He reassured the Wall Street donors that nothing will change. And indeed, what changed? Well, the billionaires got even richer. They doubled and even tripled their wealth during COVID, while ordinary working people were pushed further and further into poverty. Child poverty rates have tripled, in fact, in the last 3 years. That data just came out. Over 60% of workers are living paycheck to paycheck. Some 87 million Americans do not have adequate health insurance. Some 18 million could not afford their pharmaceuticals. Some 8 million were pushed into poverty just trying to afford their health care alone. You have young people, according to polls now, 50% are saying they are hopeless about the future, and a quarter of young people are saying that they in fact have considered harming themselves in just the last 2 weeks before that poll. So this is not a world that is working for working people in this country. And that goes hand in hand with the endless war machine, which is conducting war and genocide, specifically in the Middle East, but wars all over the world. And in fact, we have seen a whole series of catastrophic wars since 9/11 that have cost US taxpayers some $20 trillion, according to Brown University Cost of War Project. In the last year alone, these are numbers crunched by Jeffrey Sachs at the Columbia University Economics Department, that we have spent, the average American household has spent in the last year some $12,000 alone on the endless war machine.
And they expect us to not push back or have any type of a say-so about how our tax dollars are spent. That's the thing that's really interesting to me. They don't want you to protest against these wars and say, how dare you? How dare you push back against that? Oh, you must be some type of Putin puppet or something like that. As if we can't be upset about that. That's the thing that drives me crazy. I don't have the right to complain about that. How many of you want your tax dollars spent to war? How many of you want that? How many of you would prefer if your tax dollars went to something right here in the US that would help out the American people instead of being used overseas to kill people?
It's 50% and more of our congressional budget. This is costing us big time at home. It's impoverishing us at home. This is why they tell us we don't have the money for the victims of Hurricane Helene. This is why people are isolated. This is why people do not have the food and the water and the electricity that they need in the wake of the third worst hurricane on record in American history. This is why we are not fixing that problem at its source. We need to start phasing out fossil fuels. It's great to create renewables, but we need to end fossil fuels. And in fact, we need public ownership and public management and public accountability for the fossil fuel industry, for the banking industry. We need public banks. We need public management and ownership, likewise, of transportation. There's no
public banks. That's a big one, you guys, the public banking. You know that North Dakota has a public bank. It's called the Bank of North Dakota. They're kind of hush about it. They don't want to do interviews about it. I tried. But this is the reason why, part of the reason why North Dakota didn't suffer during the 2008 housing crisis the way that other states did. They had a public bank. And there should be more push for that. You don't hear Kamala Harris talking about a public bank. You don't hear Donald Trump talking about public bank. They don't want you to know about these things. You're really not supposed to know about it. Most people, again, how many of you been to North Dakota? Most of us probably haven't, right? Right. So our government really does not want you to know about public banking. That's why you don't hear them talk about it.
No way that we will have a national rail system unless we are actually coordinating that on a public basis. We also need public housing with public ownership of this critical resource. Back in the Clinton administration, they passed the so-called Fair Cloth Amendment. There was nothing fair about it. It basically prohibited any further expenditures on public housing, which is absolutely critical if we are truly going to meet the urgent and dire needs of housing in this country. Some 50% of Americans now who rent their housing are severely economically stressed, paying 30 to 50% and more of their income just to keep a roof over their heads, which doesn't leave much to pay your student loans or your car insurance or your healthcare costs and so on. We have a housing emergency in this country right now, and we can solve that right now, by the way. We can solve that by creating rent control at the federal level across the whole country to stop the gentrification, to stop the continuing displacement.
Not to mention, for most people, when you get paid, most of your money goes to what? It goes to rent. It goes to your mortgage. It goes to your housing costs.
We need a tenant bill of rights so that renters are not arbitrarily evicted so that their landlords can just raise the rent and gentrify the communities.
Yep.
In Europe, many countries are building what's now called social housing, which is mixed income, it's permanent, it's housing that's in the public domain. We need a counterweight to the private housing industry, which is driven by luxury housing and big profits for big developers. We need public housing that will meet our needs.
I want to talk about that mixed income housing. When I